In this video, we'll show you how to change the front wheel hub and wheel bearing on your Ford Fusion. You can find it on CarParts.com via the link in the description. We recommend loosening the nut on the end of the CV axle once the vehicle is on the ground. If your vehicle is equipped with aluminum rims, you will need to remove the wheel first before you can remove the central rim cover. Remove the central rim cover to access the nut on the end of the CV axle. Use a breaker bar and a 32mm socket to unblock the nut on the end of the CV axle. For safety reasons, we strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Ford Fusion safely. In order to change the wheel hub and the wheel hub bearing on your vehicle, you need to remove the wheel knuckle assembly. To do this, you must disengage the outer tie rod, disengage the strut fork, remove the ABS sensor, remove the caliper assembly, disengage the lower control arm ball joint, disengage the upper control arm ball joint. Turn the brake disc inward to make this operation easier. Remove the cotter pin from the castellated nut of the outer tie rod with pliers. Using a 17mm wrench, unscrew the outer tie rod holding nut. Using a vice grip, hold the ball joint to prevent it from turning. If you do not have a ball joint puller, a tool specifically designed for this task, take a hammer and hit the knuckle. The ball joint should come out of the knuckle. Unscrew the nut from the outer tie rod and remove it. Brush the nut of the bolt holding the strut fork to the lower control arm, then spray it with penetrating oil. Use an 18mm wrench to block the rotation of the nut. Using a ratchet and a 15mm socket, unscrew the retaining bolt. Then remove the bolt. Now you need to remove the ABS sensor. Brush the sensor retaining bolt and spray it with penetrating oil. Using a ratchet, an extender, and a 10mm socket, unscrew the ABS sensor's retaining bolt. Then remove the sensor by jiggling it back and forth. Using a ratchet and an 8mm socket, unscrew the bolt holding the ABS sensor cable bracket. Using needle nose pliers, unclip the ABS sensor cable retaining clip located on the wheel knuckle. Shift the ABS sensor cable. Using a ratchet and a long 10mm socket, unscrew the bolt securing the brake hose bracket. Then move the bracket aside. Insert a flathead screwdriver thin enough to fit between the two walls of the disc. It must be inserted before the caliper mount so that it can abut against it. Using a ratchet and a Torx T40 socket, loosen the two bolts holding the disc. Then remove the screwdriver. Finish unscrewing the nut on the end of the CV axle. Tip: attach a piece of electrical cable or a hook to one of the strut spring coils. Insert a flathead screwdriver into the opening of the brake caliper. Lift it off using the screwdriver as a lever by pulling it towards you. This will cause the piston to retract slightly so that the caliper can be removed more easily for the next steps. Using a ratchet and a 15mm socket, unscrew the two holding bolts on the caliper mount. Depending on the state of the bolts on the caliper mount, it may be necessary to use a hammer to loosen them. Finish unscrewing by hand. Remove the caliper assembly and hang it on the hook. You must then disengage the lower control arm ball joints from the wheel knuckle. Brush the lower ball joint retaining nut and spray it with penetrating oil. Using a ratchet and a 23mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the lower ball joint a few threads. Then, using a ball joint puller, release the ball joint. You can now repeat the process on the second ball joint. You must then disengage the upper control arm ball joint from the wheel knuckle. Brush the upper control arm ball joint retainer nut and spray it with penetrating oil. Release the ball joint with the 17mm wrench. You can use a ratchet and a 6mm Allen socket to stop the ball joint from rotating. Knock on the knuckle to separate the ball joint from the upper control arm. Finish unscrewing the disc retaining bolts in order to remove it. Sometimes the disc may get stuck on the hub. If this happens, use a hammer to remove it. Finally, remove the disc. Before removing the lower ball joints, it is necessary to support the wheel hub with a jack to prevent the wheel knuckle from falling. Remove the nuts. The wheel knuckle is now free. Remove the wheel knuckle. You now need to press the wheel hub using a hydraulic press in order to extract it from the wheel bearing. Take a 40mm bearing dismantling cup, then press the wheel hub outwards. Once the wheel hub is disengaged from the bearing, secure the wheel knuckle in the vise once again in the opposite direction. In most cases, when you press the wheel hub, part of the bearing remains attached to the wheel hub. It is therefore mandatory after pressing the wheel hub to replace the wheel bearing. Brush and spray the bearing with penetrating oil on the retaining ring. Using Circlip pliers, remove the bearing retaining ring. You can also use a screwdriver and a hammer in order to release the retaining ring. We recommend taking the opportunity to change the brake backing plate, which can only be removed by taking out the wheel hub. Brush the contact surface of the brake backing plate with the wheel knuckle.
For great content, our best price, and fast shipping, download the CarParts.com app now.
With a marker, trace a line between the brake backing plate and the wheel knuckle. You can now remove the backing plate. You can also use a pin punch and a hammer. To effectively push the bearing along the axis of the press, we recommend positioning the wheel knuckle on a press support. This will enable you to adjust its orientation until it's perfect. Take a 65mm bearing dismantling cup, then press the wheel bearing outwards. Once the wheel bearing has been removed, thoroughly clean the location of the bearing in the wheel knuckle, thoroughly using an abrasive sponge. Finish with brake cleaner and wipe with a paper towel. Turn the wheel knuckle over and put it back on the press support. Apply assembly grease to facilitate the installation of the new bearing. You can order the wheel bearing used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take the new bearing. Apply assembly grease to facilitate the installation. Place the old bearing on top of the new one, since it's exactly the same diameter as the new one, with the bearing dismantling cup on top. Next, press the assembly until the new bearing comes to a stop, or you have the space you need to position the retaining clip. Put the wheel knuckle back in the vise. Then reinsert the retaining clip. You can use a pin punch and a hammer to help you. Be careful not to make the mistake of installing the wheel hub before putting the brake backing plate back in place. Take the new brake backing plate. Use the markings made with the marker to return it to its original position. You can also use a chisel and a hammer. Take the new wheel hub. Place the wheel hub on the press. You can position it on a socket so as not to rest on the threading. Place the wheel knuckle on the press. Take a dismantling cup so that you can press the central ring of the wheel bearing onto the wheel hub until it stops. The preparation of the new part is now complete. Now you can put the wheel knuckle back in place. Start by temporarily replacing the control arm ball joint in its knuckle, using the jack, and then screw it back in. Finish tightening using the wrench. You can now complete the tightening of the upper control arm ball joint with the torque wrench. Remove the jack. Roughly install the CV axle in the wheel knuckle. Place the lower ball joints in the wheel knuckle. Then, screw the nuts back on until they make contact. Fully reinsert the CV axle into the wheel hub assembly. Clean the wheel hub with brake cleaner and a paper towel. Reinstall the brake disc. Screw the 2 retaining bolts back in until they make contact. Replace the hub nut. Finish tightening the nuts holding the lower ball joints using a torque wrench. You can now reinstall the caliper assembly. Take the assembly and screw it back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Use the screwdriver technique to stop the rotation of the disc. This will allow you to fully tighten the fastening bolts with the torque wrench. Then remove the screwdriver. Screw the metal hose mounting bracket back on. Don't forget to remove the hook that you used to hold the caliper assembly together. Screw the ABS sensor cable clamp back on. Put the ABS sensor cable back in place. Before installing the ABS sensor, we recommend that you thoroughly clean its location using a wire brush. Apply silicone grease to facilitate the installation. Insert the sensor into its housing. Then, retighten the retaining bolt. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Put the strut fork retaining bolt back on the lower control arm. Then screw the nut back on until it makes contact. In order not to damage the bushings, it is necessary to tighten the retaining bolts in the vehicle on the ground position. To do this, we advise you to use a jack to apply pressure to the control arm. Once in place, you can screw the pinch bolt back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Remove the jack. Using a wire brush, scrub the knuckle of the wheel knuckle, then apply silicone grease to the flat part that will be in contact with the sleeve of the outer tie rod. Do not grease the inside of the cone. Reinsert the ball joint, then screw the castle nut back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Take the cotter pin and fit it into the castle nut. You can now bend the cotter pin. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put the car back on the ground and block the wheels properly. Finish tightening the hub nut once the vehicle is on the ground using a torque wrench. Depending on the type of wheel on your car, you may need to lift your vehicle again. You will have to remove the wheel in order to crimp the nut on the end of the CV axle using a pin punch and a hammer. Put the central rim cover back on. Then you will be able to put the wheel back on your vehicle. Put your vehicle back on the ground before properly fixing the wheel in place. Operation complete.